Oh, see?
I'm seeing it. It's just a little, yeah, it's a little bit, there, now it's popped up.
Okay. And I have, this is a part, this will just be a part of my, I've skipped part. So we were at the part, Paula was going to talk about it, how homosexuality was thought of as an illness, then it gets depathologized. And one of the ways it gets depathologized is we start to talk about sexuality as socially constructed. And this is where Kinsey came in. There are too many people who are homosexual, and it starts to look too normal. And you find homosexuality in every species. You find it to some extent in every culture. Now, people will deny that to this day, but it's not true. There is some. So then this is an important question. This is an important question for her whole thesis. What is the difference between a phenomenon that's ahistorical and a phenomenon that is biohistorical? What does she mean by that? This is them. What is ahistorical and what is biohistorical? She talks about this earlier, she talks about this later. Brooke, do you want to take a chance on that?
My printer just started going off. I don't know why. So I'm like trying to mute myself so you don't have to hear it. But let's see. So what is the difference between ahistorical? Is this have to do with something that hasn't been documented in history versus,
No, it has to do with this idea. Ahistorical would mean this is universal. It would mean the position heterosexuality is universal. Heterosexuality is normal in every culture. Freud would say everybody has sex instincts. It's a little bit like the word universal, meaning it's in every culture. So this biological essentialism is a little bit like something that's ahistorical. Everybody, it's always this way. Biohistorical is her main thesis, that even if there are biological universals, there are also cultural universals. And whatever happens is the function or the result of the interaction of biology and the interaction of the social and cultural. So she's saying you always are having them interactive. So she's, even if you say there's heterosexuality in every culture, of course there is, because we wouldn't reproduce if there weren't. She's saying yes, but there are variations and it's not exactly the same. I mean, you have cultures in which women can never touch a weapon, and cultures in which, like Israel, in which women have to be in the army. So you have differences between men and women in every culture. And she would say, because the male is normative, there's inequality in every culture, but she doesn't think it's always the same because the particular culture is going to interface. For example, she uses food for an example. Food is absolutely biologically necessary. There is food in every culture. Every culture teaches children to eat and what to eat and how to eat it. However, what we think is good, what we think is a treat, is different from culture to culture. That's a good analogy, isn't it? I mean, it's not hard. I think it's a pretty good analogy. So she's saying we got to analyze things by the social organization of the culture. She says, and this is almost like an aside, she goes back, you know, we've been talking up to the 1900s, mid 20th century, but she goes back to before the 1800s or before the late 1800s, and she said sexuality was just sexual actions. People weren't talking about masculine and feminine, people were talking about having sex, doing it. doing something. The distinction was sometimes made if it was procreative or not. But sexuality was not being tied to psychology or masculinity, femininity. She says, as it says on the slide, there's cultural variation. She talks about this from some other author, a grid of definition. In other words, sometimes when I want to explain this to undergraduates, I say, what's a sex role? So there are sex roles, there are sex role stereotypes. These are the questions. What can women do that men can't do? What can men do that women can't do? What can men do more often or are allowed to do more often? What are people forbidden to do? What must you do to be a man? What must you do to be a woman? What must you not do? They're not the same question. And they kind of show you that maybe there's a grid that's not exactly the same. The definitions aren't going to be right in one place, or everybody's going to have that definition. So is homosexuality normal? There are cultures in which the boy must engage in homosexual acts to become a man. Only when he's a teenager, only when he's 17 or so, he has to have a sexual relationship with an older man. Just then, it will be wrong later. Very different from our idea. So this grid of definition is interesting. I mean, we've had people who would say homosexuality is always wrong, but that's not the only definition. There is a grid. Why does Bem not like the word homophobia? She doesn't care for the word. Homophobia, of course, means the fear of.
I think I know the answer to this one. Is this because it implies some kind of pathology, and it's actually a prejudice. It's an attitude rather than a phobia like any other fear.
It is an attitude. It is. That's right. It's an attitude. It's not always a real fear. Or it could be. It could be. People act like I could catch it. That can actually happen. But so partly it's a fear. Her other problem, though, much more serious problem, she says that puts it in the person. See, she's like homophobic. She's
right.
Homophobic. And she wants to say it's a social organizational thing.
Okay.
Which is what she's saying all the time in this book. She's wanting to go from something that's just the individual choice or the individual pathology or the individual preference. She wants to say, yeah, but how is this situated? How is androcentrism situating this? How are the beliefs about biological essentialism and gender polarization situating all of this? So then there's a whole section on masculinity and femininity. I could make this even bigger. Could this be bigger on your screens?
It's big, pretty big.
Pretty big? It's not the slideshow. Bigger, right? She talks about early women pioneers on the topic of masculinity, femininity. She mentions Helen Thompson Woolley and Letta Stetter Hollingworth. They're mentioned in the Shields article, which is also up on the Moodle page. They were going against the prejudice against women in the late 1800s, early 1900s. They did not find statistically significant differences in intelligence, abilities, talents, or in variability. That's just a summary. And then she starts to talk about Terman. I have the question, who is he? Terman is, we're talking early 20th century, like 1910, 1920. He is famous, most famous for an intelligence scale, what we call the Stanford-Binet. Very, very famous intelligence test in the United States. It really should be called the Terman-Binet. He was at Stanford, it got the name of Stanford, but it is really a very early intelligence test used almost to the present. That's what he's best known for. But he started to say, let's look at masculinity, femininity. He thought of them as mutually exclusive. So in his way of testing it, measuring it, there's one dimension. So if you're high on femininity, by definition, you're low on masculinity. If you're high on one, you're low on the other. One line. It's called bipolar, but it means one line, two ends. So if you're high on one, you're low on the other. And it also, his work also had this effect to make it sound like masculinity is a thing and femininity is a thing. He said, and he thinks that homosexuality is abnormal, that it is normal to be, if you're a male, it's normal to be masculine and heterosexual. If you're a female, it's normal to be feminine and heterosexual. So his work is important in that. This is on an earlier slide, I'll just ask it. You know, everybody knows the difference between sex and gender? Nod your head. Yeah. So sex means biology, and we use the words male and female. Personality, psychological traits are called masculine and feminine. So if you want to say males are rougher and females are more delicate, that's about masculinity, femininity. It is not about being male or female. Being male or female is about having genitalia that fit. So the one is biological, the other is psychological and social. Really important dimension. Important one for Ben, especially. So you ended up with this idea that there was another scale, I don't have it mentioned here. The MMPI also had a masculinity femininity scale. The MMPI was a major, I think still is perhaps, a major instrument to measure pathology. It has many subscales. The masculinity femininity is just one. It was standardized on homosexuals. It wasn't even standardized on a representative group. So in the middle of the 20th century, we have this idea of homosexuality as abnormal and pathological. How does that change? Well, she said there were different things that happened. There were a few people who were got kind of famous because they had a sex change surgery. You had gender identity disorders. We talked about it in an earlier chapter, I think. You have sex change surgery. This is about the 60s. You start to have people saying, we got to fix people who are abnormal. They have therapies for cross-gender identification. They said, let's diagnose the kids early, then we can fix them. Homosexuality continues to be a disorder up until 1980s. So now they want to know, what are the risks for transsexualism? What are the risks for homosexuality? They want to look at little kids and say, maybe there's a problem. But gradually homosexuality is seen as, I'm going to go do this quickly. The child is asked to change, not allowed to be self-affirming. But there is a major critic, the name you should know, Thomas Zaz. He's a critic of psychiatry. He is a critic of the way mental health and illness get defined. He's just against what we do in clinical fields. He said their mental health and mental illness are defined so as to reinforce highly polarized social scripts for males and females. So he raises this question, Ben raises this question, are we talking about an individual pathology? This person isn't being as masculine as he should, or this person is not being as feminine as she should, or is this social? That we've got all these rules about what men should do and women should do, which is what she thinks is the extreme polarization. She wants to say in the whole book, she says everything is polarized. Everything is polarized. What I say in my gender classes or my undergraduate developmental psych classes, I say, I'm going to say a word. You tell me if it's masculine or feminine. What's more feminine, a flute or a bass drum? What's more masculine, assertiveness or delicacy? And I could go on forever and ever. And we give an answer. We say, no, this is feminine, this is masculine, for a million things. I think that makes the point that she's making, that we're very polarized. even when it doesn't make sense, and even when we don't believe it, we know these stereotypes. So then she talks about the development of masculinity, femininity in normal children. I like this line I have here, rigid conformist at a young age. I typically say, maybe I said this in class last time, the most sexist people are in second grade. They think, no, that's a boy thing. No, that's a, oh, they have cooties, they used to say when I was young. Real rigid. They have come to understand some things are for boys and some things are for girls, and they are rigid about what other people should be doing and even what they should be doing. Now, in terms of explaining how people develop their understanding of gender in development, she picks up on cognitive developmental psychology. Piaget's the course of cognitive developmentalists. Then she starts to give the ideas from Kohlberg, who's sort of like using some of Piaget kinds of ideas. Children are pattern seekers. They're trying to discover regularities, and then they're trying to construct roles and rules, and they self-enforce them. This is the pre-operational child, or even the early concrete operational child. They're moral realists. This is the rigidity. There are no exceptions. No, girls can't do that. No, boys can't do that. They're rigid. And because this comes from Piaget too, they're perception bound. They focus on surface qualities. She has pictures in the book about if kids can understand the anatomical differences. Kohlberg would say that eventually children come to understand genitalia, and then they know there's gender constancy. But before that, they don't know about gender constancy. So they think if a boy puts on girl clothes, he becomes a girl, and the reverse. So if you make somebody a boy wear a girl's wig, he becomes a girl. So they don't really understand that genitals are the point about male female. Eventually, at some point, they learn this, and certainly by 5 they should learn it. And then Kohlberg says, then they're going to socialize themselves. Then they're going to say, oh, I go with this group. I'm a girl, I go with the women because I'll be a woman when I grow up. Girls with this genitalia become women. Boys with this genitalia become men. I belong to this category. There are 2 categories. And they're relatively fixed. So I better fit my category. So Kohlberg says, by the time they get gender constancy, they're going to really want to make themselves do the right thing, right quotation marks, and say, I got to do the things that fit me. I've got to do the male things, or I've got to do the masculine things or the feminine things. Is that clear? Oh, that clear. Maybe it's even last semester. Okay. The next line, them. What about earlier gender awareness? She ended up, she doesn't say this in the book, but she said, hey, you know what? They are into male-female stuff before they even understand gender constancy. And there are lots of studies of this. I might have told you this story. It was not them, it was some other researchers. Both the man and the woman were psychologists and were researchers. They were trying to raise their kid in a non-sexist way. The father did the grocery shopping. They lived in New York City. He took the little girl, who was about 3.5, grocery shopping. She said to the mother, "Mommies shop. Daddies don't shop. Mommies shop." She said, "That's not true. Your daddy shops." No, she said, "Mommies shop. Daddies don't shop." The mother repeats, "You went with your daddy, blah, blah, blah." The girl is insistent. "No, mommies shop. Daddies don't shop." Finally, the 3.5-year-old says, "Mommy, I counted." Now, she can't count. She didn't exactly she noticed. She noticed there were more women in the grocery store. She noticed. So she is ready to make this dichotomy. She's looking for the dichotomy. She knows that gender is an important dichotomy because it is. Because we have boy toys and girls toys, we have pink and blue, all kinds of things that Bem talks about. So she's looking now. for the dichotomy because there often is a dichotomy, and she notices. So that tells you it's even earlier than Kohlberg would have said. So then Bem is talking about the 70s and 80s, and this includes her own work. She mentions a study by Broverman and colleagues. This was really a series of studies. And this is what they did. They gave people a piece of paper. Now the people were mental health workers. They were counselors, clinicians, social workers. They're not the average people. They said, I'm going to give you a blank piece of paper, and I want you, and this was the question, what are the characteristics of a normal adult? Or they got a piece of paper that said, what are the characteristics of a normal psychologically healthy male? Or what are the characteristics of a normal psychologically healthy female? All right, so they get one of, and they got lots of data like that. What happened is the characteristics that were considered those of normal healthy adults, independent, compliant, reasonably assertive, were the characteristics of a normal healthy male. The characteristics of a normal healthy female were more like delicate, caring, nurturing, dependent, like a perfect example of androcentrism, like a perfect example. But there's this is data. This is not just talking or theorizing. This is data in the 70s. There were several, as I said, there were several studies like this. So that tells you the bias. And this is in educated people who work with people. You know, this, the guy on the street or the girl on the street. Okay, so Bem then devises a sex role inventory, famous sex role inventory. And it's going to be different than the one we had from Terman or anybody else. Now, I have this question here. I also have it in an earlier slide. What is masculinity? What is femininity? I'm going to give you the definition. Anyone want to try this? I'll say it to save time. Masculinity or femininity is the degree to which one shows the characteristics that are stereotypically with that sex. So femininity, or to be feminine or to have femininity, is to have those qualities that are stereotypically associated with women in your culture. And to have masculinity is to have the qualities that are stereotypically associated with women in your culture. So a way of looking at this is to say masculinity and femininity are the degree to which you fit the stereotypes of your culture. They have, she implies this, I'm going to say it more strongly, they have nothing to do with sex. They have to do with these psychological characteristics or social characteristics. They don't have to do with homosexuality or heterosexuality. They don't have to do with sexuality. They have to do with those things that have been associated with males and females in the culture. Is that clear? That's real important. Okay. So she ends up with a scale that has actually two scales. Now, you take all the questions, you don't know it has two scales, they're all together, but really there are two scales. There is a scale for masculinity, high or low. There's a scale for femininity, high or low. When you put that on a grid, you have high masculinity, high to low, femininity, high to low. You're going to have 4 quadrants. So you end up with 4 types here in a way. Now, that means you get a measure. Everybody gets a measure of masculinity and a measure of femininity. So this is like a graph. So we'll do this like this. Oh no, you're not going to see it because you can't. No. Okay, so basically, in one quadrant, you would have high masculinity, low femininity. So you have traditional masculinity. In another quadrant, kind of the opposite side, the opposite end, you would have high femininity and low masculinity. You have the traditional femininity person. You also have, though, the possibility of being high on both or low on both. So now you have high masculinity, high femininity. She's going to call that androgyny. Okay, and I have a definition there. incorporating cultural definitions of both masculinity and femininity, or having self-concepts that are not intertwined with the cultural definitions. Now, this is like a measurement issue, but it's really a very, very interesting concept. And it challenged gender polarization. It's saying, wait a minute, people can be both. People can be assertive and compassionate. People can be empathic and leading. Okay. So it raises this idea that maybe norms of mental health should be genderless. Maybe.
I'm sorry, sister, just a quick question.
Sure.
So then this would mean that these androgyny and masculinity and femininity would need to be defined differently in every culture, right?
Yes, right. And she's really not for this polarization anyway. I mean, she's really saying it's not a good, there's things that are not good about this polarization. She's saying that through the whole book. I'm going to skip a little. Now, what happens is that there are problems with her concept of androgyny, people, and she admits them. So actually, it turns out that the androgynous person has a lot of masculine characteristics, like they're independent and they are strong. Now, it can be a woman that has those and also has compassion and empathy, but there tends to be this idea that there's a perfect person. There tends to be a tendency to make women think they have to pick up these other, that women have to do what women do, and they also have to do what men do. The problem here, it says, this idea doesn't recognize the inequality in society. So, sometimes it's looked at as putting more burdens on women when the social structures are unequal, when the social structures are not fair. So now you can go and get a good career and have children, and not get any extra time to take care of the children when you want a high-powered job in your field. You follow that? I mean, the social structure is not fair. It focuses, it does not mean, she did not want it to focus on the polarity, but it does focus on the polarity because it says you got to be both. And it doesn't focus on power or class. So it leaves something out. She's saying this is the downside. It doesn't say, yeah, but social class plays a part, but who has power plays a part, maybe race plays a part, maybe social class and economics plays a part. So you have women who work very hard at low-paying jobs. It doesn't say anything about that. It doesn't say enough about social structure. And it reifies the distinction it was meant to cut. It makes masculinity and femininity, gives them a little more oomph in a certain kind of way. Is that okay? Those last ones? Okay. So this is again criticizing her own same kinds of things. Then she has, but then she goes from that instrument, the BEM sexual inventory, to coming up with gender schema theory. Schema is that word we use. We used the word meme before. She's not only says there are these memes about how our females and how our males, but she says we internalize the polarities of our culture. So we get to be gender polarizing ourselves. That is, we say, I should be more this way because I'm female, or I'm not being feminine enough, or I'm not being masculine enough. And I'm going to make these judgments about other people. I'm going to say, well, he's a nice guy, but he's a little soft. She's a good-hearted woman. Boy, she's tough. And I'm going to be using these same things in a judgmental way because the culture that I've gotten socialized to is in me. This is about the lenses. They are in me. So she's talking about cultural constructions that make us highly enculturated natives. What's a native? This is a real question. I've been talking too much. What's a native? Who is a native? You're a native of Scranton.
People who are so immersed that you don't, I'm going to Keegan and the subject and object, right? If you're a native, everything is completely subject to you. You're a part of that culture. It's the way it is. It's the fish in the water.
Yeah, the fish doesn't see the water. The fish doesn't know about water because the fish is in the water. So when you think this is how the world is, the way it is in my culture, that's because you're a native. I had a question. I don't know that I might have put it in someplace. We become highly enculturated and we see everything the way it is. We think it's natural for men to be this way and women to be the other way. I heard one of the African sisters, I was teaching a couple years ago, and we're talking about stuff like this, and she said, girls don't ride bikes, boys ride bikes, girls don't ride bikes. Not in my culture. In my culture, girls ride two-wheelers, but not in her culture. And that would have seemed very natural to her. Bike riding is for boys. One of the I talked about how tough we are on boys, which Bem isn't right through Bem's book. I was talking about that to these African sisters, and they said, my father gets really upset when one of my brothers carries water for my mother. Right? Now this is a culture where we're carrying water from one place to another. All right, so still a village kind of thing in Africa. And that's not how it is for me. For me, I think if it's heavy, the boy should do it. That's in my culture. Boys do heavy things. Carrying water, boys should do. But see, no, in that culture, carrying water is what women do. I'm a native of my culture, and she's implying the things that are part of her culture. Now, what Bem thinks is great about her theory is that she's hoping that we can learn how to see our own lenses. To know that this is not the only way. This is not the only type of glasses that there are. So she's hoping that this gender schema theory says, how did I make that schema? And then I can see the glasses, or I can know I'm in this water. Okay, now I have a question here at the end. What are the limitations of these contributions? What is another kind of feminist? There are two kinds of feminists, minimalist feminists and maximalist feminists. Do you know what those are? No, okay. She's a minimalist feminist. She identifies herself that way, gives the names of other famous writers who are minimalist feminists. I think I'm a minimalist feminist. I think feminism believes men and women should be treated equally. But we'll use that as a general liberal feminism, which most people actually in this country believe. I think they say things like, I think there should be equal pay for equal work, but I'm not a feminist. But that is a feminist position. Okay. I'm a minimalist feminist because I don't want to be a biological essentialist. There are differences between men and women, and maybe some of them are biological, but you're going to have to prove it to me first, because I think it could be the culture. Do you follow that? That's my default. So that's why I'm a minimal feminist. I want to assume there's similarity. Now that's like a belief. It's not. But then now, if you show me there's a difference, okay. But I'm going to go with men and women are alike, except for the social, cultural things that make us different. Now, it's like my default. It's like a bias, but that's the kind of feminist I am. There's another kind of feminist. They're called maximalists. Sometimes they're called women-centered writers, and they want to celebrate the female difference. And her heading for that section of the chapter is Beyond Science, the celebration of female difference. So she gives some examples of some of these writers. She said, they want to say women are unique, women are different. Why don't we just celebrate what women aren't the same? And why don't we make a big deal about how women are different? So women emphasize human connection, mutual empowerment, harmony. These are important, and why don't we value these things and say these are things that men bring? Some of them are very suspicious about science, because they say males created science. For the most part, the early scientists were males, not always. And in doing that, they separate the self from the other. That's the subject object, just like in Keegan. I'm here, I'm studying that, whatever that is. And Gilligan, you probably had this in another course, Gilligan said Kohlberg talks about the morality of distributive justice. He doesn't talk about the morality of care and connection. He doesn't say, how do you figure out what is the right thing to do when you look at all your relationships? Gilligan has a book called In a Different Voice. She explains about women making decisions about abortion, taking into account their families, not the value of human life itself in a kind of abstract way, but if I have this child, I have these 3 other children or 4. So she's saying there's a different way of doing morality than that women have that men don't have. She's not, and in truth, that's not the reality. In truth, both men and women can use justice perspectives or can use care perspectives. But it is saying we have a tendency to see things as men have seen them. That's what we're talking about in gender, in male as normative. Now, the criticism that Bem is making is saying, yeah, but if you're just going to celebrate women and all these wonderful things about women, yeah, but you're going to not see the oppression and the patriarchy. That's, there are different kinds of feminists. There is a group of Black writers. They're women they fall in this maximalist position. Sometimes they're called womanists. But at any rate, she's raising these issues. She's saying, but it's good to have a woman-centered lens. She's not against that, but she's seeing the limitations. Okay. Then in the next chapter, she talks about 4 ways of constructing gender identity. And these are—
Sorry, sister, if I can just ask a quick question. It seems like to me that part of the problem with the maximalists is it reinforces the whole, just the distinction that seems to be so easily turned into a patriarchy. I mean, am I missing something here? That celebrating the woman, celebrating the differences seems to erode the effort to try to create the equality?
I think you're exactly right. I think this is where women who are working for women's rights can have real controversies. So you want to say, listen, we want the fact that women are mothers and women are child bearers and women are child carers. Women are carers. Women are the caregivers of old people. And, I mean, you're better off if you have a daughter than if you have a son, because you're going to get better care when you're 85. There are things, not always, but often. So let's celebrate that. On the other hand, that can make you say, yeah, but see, it's just natural. We let women do that and we won't pay them for it. I mean, it's billions of dollars that caretakers in the family are contributing to the American culture. Billions of dollars. Everybody you know who's taking care of an elderly mother, mother-in-law, father-in-law, much, much money, not paid at all. It's free from women. So there is a danger. There is a danger that the pushing for the rights and equality can be undercut. Okay. What time is it? I don't want to go over. And okay. I think you should look at these 4. She clearly talks about how gender identity is acquired. We're socialized as children. The social structure itself constrains us. There's psychodynamic conflict, because this is the idea of psychodynamic conflict. If we have to be one way, I've got to be this way, there are other parts of me that want to be the other way. So I have to be nice because I'm a female, but I want to be strong. maybe I sacrifice wanting to be strong for wanting to be nice, or vice versa. Males are sacrificing wanting to be caring and affectionate toward their children for wanting to be a little tough. You follow that. There's something being repressed, I guess would be a Freudian word, because we've got these masculinity, femininity constructs. And then the individual constructs his or her own identity. So we're in a social structure. We're socialized by the people around us. No, don't do that. That's a boy thing, right? That's socializing. But in a way, I then have to figure out how I'm going to be. So if I had to write an essay about myself, like I could make my undergraduates do this. It's not so much about the essay, about what I'm doing in my mind. I'm saying this is how I am. And in some way, how I construct my understanding of myself is going to be affected by this gender polarization. Okay, so far okay? Keisha, that's okay? Yeah, okay. Then I have this sentence, I just threw this in. Everyone is a sexist. What do you think? Who's going to speak? Brooke?
Oh, I guess I'm on mute. Yeah. I think that like what we were saying before, that even those of us who want to work really hard to not be sexist, it's so entrenched that it's really hard to not be. You know, it's just part of who we are because of, you know, it's just ingrained for us to see the world a certain way.
Yeah, I think it is. I think that's what she's talking about in this whole book. She's saying we have these lenses. They're made by the social structure. They're reinforced in our lives as we grow up. We construct ourselves along those lines and construct the society also. We are part of the society that constructs things this way. So in some way we are, what's the word I want? Complicit in how the society is constructed. We're part of it. We're, you know, the line, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. Maybe you don't know that line. It was a line from the 60s and 70s when there was a lot of social activism. This implies that, I think.
I think too, like, even if you are trying to not be part of the problem, there's no way to react to everything that's gendered because it's so polarized. You would just be saying all day long, that's sexist, that's gender bias. Like, you would just be saying it everywhere you turned. So there's no way to not, at some point, just let some things go.
Right. That's
Imagine living in a culture or that the language is gendered. I mean, I'm thinking of, you know, my remedial Spanish, and everything has got a male and female inclination.
Yeah. Right.
I think sometimes too, when you fall into those categories, like things that are considered very feminine, but you actually really do like them and you really do enjoy them and they do fit your personality, and part of you is like, all right, but I do like these things, but then you also feel like you're conforming and going by, like, do I like it because society told me to, or do I really just enjoy these?
Right. Yeah.
That's true. That's true. And you know, I guess the ideal would be when people can do anything and try anything. Kind of maybe as we get older, we end up saying, I can try something different. I can be a different way. You know, Jung talks about a midlife crisis. I don't really exactly believe in a midlife crisis, but as we get older, we can say, I could try something else, I think. Okay. Okay, we did this one already. Inculturation is how you learn to be part of your culture. To be native means just natural to you. We talked about this. This is a sentence I made up. To know many cultures is to be a native of none. That's a little far, maybe it's a little extreme. But because we have a history, and we know the history. But when we know more cultures, we hold our own culture a little lighter. We hold the requirements, I think, a little lighter. Okay.
Sister, I just had this very conversation with a friend who he was raised a Byzantine Catholic. He trained at my Zen Buddhist monastery for 8 years with me, and he is now he's starting his early formation as a Jesuit. And he was talking about really trying to reconcile that he feels very at home with each tradition, but he feels like there's some similarities, but he can't really truly belong to one of them because he's been so influenced by the other, and that will always sort of make him an outsider. So I think there's something, I think, rather insightful. And then again, I hate repeating it, but it seems very much, your statement there sounds very much like Keegan's subject-object. We do, if we remove ourselves a little bit from our own culture and identify with another, yes, we're still very comfortable. It's our founding place. We all have a starting place, but I do think you're no longer necessarily swept away with it in the same way.
Yes, and I believe that this is belief. This is belief about God and truth. I mean, I think things are all one someplace. We don't know that place. We're far from that place. There is a place where there is a oneness to things, but we don't have that experience. That man doesn't have that experience, and neither do the rest of us. Okay. So I think Ben talks about gendered personality and the gendered body and the abhorrence of homosexuality. And I don't know where I am in the book at this point. I'll see if I can find it. This is in the construction of gender identity chapter. And she gives examples, studies of, she summarizes research she did in which people who have stronger or more strongly conventionally gendered act differently than people who are not conventionally gendered, different in how they react to words, different in how they react to memory. There's just huge literature about this, and she goes over some of it. She says the gendered personality is both process and product. So we have a gendered personality from our history, but then that is also a process of how we're living now. So it's like ongoing in some way, because we're organizing information on the basis of gender. So she has people reacting to words in one study. She has people trying to remember who said what in a meeting. And if a woman said it, they may forget which women, but they'll know they'll answer it's a woman. They'll say, no, it was Keisha, even when it was Brooke, but they won't say it was Anthony, or Paul. She looks at people avoid doing things that don't seem gendered, that don't seem to fit their gender, rather, that don't seem culturally appropriate for their gender. She uses the words, and these are terms, she uses the words and explains this more than once: instrumental or agentic, and expressive or communal. Those are words we now use instead of masculine, feminine. We use instrumental or agentic instead of masculine, and expressive or communal instead of feminine. Then she has a section on the gendered body. And she's saying what our gender is affecting what we think our bodies should be like, what we value of our body, especially a problem for women. In particular for women, there are female beauty is looked at as part of what women are supposed to be. That fits in with things we said before. So the gender polarizing message is women should not look at all like men. And women accentuate their natural sexual difference so they won't look like men. And it is natural for women to put on a layer of fat under their skin when they get to puberty. Women are softer. You know, the thigh of a woman is going to be softer than the thigh of a man if you just touch it. But women don't like that. There's tremendous negative feelings about being heavy, of being fat in our culture. She was talking about that. The use of space is different. I say to how to sit, how much space you think you should take. You end up with male dominance in lots of different ways. And then you look at what happens in terms of how women define themselves, what happens in terms of how men define themselves. She ends up talking about rape and abuse. And then she talks about the abhorrence of homosexuality. She talks about gender insecurity among males. She really talks about gender insecurity in both. Worse in males. Like, this question, am I male enough? Am I masculine enough? She hates that idea. Am I feminine enough? She really hates this idea. It's in between everything she's saying. But she on page 166, she says, men engage in two destructive forms of masculinity building that are directly related to homosexuality. The gender insecurity predisposes them to suppress virtually all cross-gender impulses, including the desire for physical intimacy with their fathers or their sons. This is especially in Anglo-Americans, not Hispanic Americans so much, but in European, Northern Europe, not in Italian so much, in Northern European, people from a Northern European background. And then the only exception is in certain kinds of situations, like a football field. You can hit the guy and say, hey, you did great, that's okay. But you don't express physical feelings very often. And then the psychological otherizing of the feminine. So in other words, feminine is whatever feminism, I can't be that. I must not be that. This fits in with one of the authors she had mentioned earlier, Nancy Chodorow. The little boy, 2 years old, has to say, I'm not mom. I'm not like mom. I can't be that way. I shouldn't be that way. Interesting. And so the fear of homosexuality, the abhorrence of homosexuality comes from that. She has a little section on how people get to be nonconformists. She says something that we kind of implied in the last class, the earlier course, that an otherized group, that means a minority of any kind, sees things better. Like other otherized groups made to be the other, they can see the lenses of the dominant culture in a way that people in the dominant culture can't see it. That's interesting, and she would be supporting that idea.
Who was that? That was last semester. I remember we were talked about that. I can't remember the name. It wasn't Walsh. Jagger. Yeah. Okay, then I have this other question. She looks at the problem of identity politics. She's saying there is a tension between having identity politics. I want to work for the women's rights, or I want to work for gay rights. And how one works, and that's about the ideology. And then how am I going to work against it? Because if I work against it, I almost like
emphasize it. Do you follow that? There's a trick here. There's a difficulty here, a paradox. So when we challenge the inequality, we sometimes are emphasizing the differences. And this is at the end of like 174, 175. It makes for a paradox. It makes for a kind of problem. I'm going to say we should have rules and regulations that give extra help to women because they've been discriminated against. But if you do that, it makes them seem different. You follow that? It's like a double-edged sword. And what I have at the end there, compare androgyny as moral and androgyny as reifying. That was her problem with androgyny. Androgyny is a good thing. We can have masculine and feminine characteristics, but it gives a lot of attention to masculine and feminine characteristics. And this is the same kind of thing. It's on 175, the end of this chapter. So her answer is to transform the debate. She wants to eradicate androcentrism. She wants to eradicate gender polarization. And that's the last chapter. I don't know if I have any other questions. Oh, we did this one.
We're over time too.
Okay, all right. Let me see what else I have here. Okay. All right, let's just all look at this slide. Read this slide to yourself. So she's saying we shouldn't be having the world androcentric, organized from a male perspective, organized to take care of male needs. And we should have a neutral environment. The neutrality should be broad and deep. It doesn't mean we're just going to give women equal pay for equal work. We're going to give the whole society child care and parental leave like they have in Norway. And everybody can benefit from whatever there is to benefit from. It's going to be broad and deep equality. This line, biology also always interacts with the environment. That's her alternative hypothesis in an earlier chapter. She's always saying there's a biohistorical reality. The biology is always interacting with the environment. And then eradicating gender polarization. One, we don't have two groups. We have within group differences. Some women are stronger than some men. Women, if you take the women, there are all kinds of women. If you take the men, there are all kinds of men on anything. And then this is the last one. Biology is biology. She wants us to stress sex as sex, not masculinity, femininity. I don't think I'm female. I don't think I'm feminine enough. I don't think I'm masculine enough. Do I have the structures? If I have the structures, I'm a woman. If I have the structures, I'm a man, period. And what do I do with those structures is called sex. She doesn't want it tied into, am I delicate, am I compassionate, am I strong, you follow that? I mean, she wants us to look at sex. She wants to teach sex. She doesn't want to mix up these psychological characteristics with biological sex. Is that clear? It's a major point of hers. I think it goes through the whole thing. Okay, now, what do we think of this? I think I will be asking Paul and Kevin and Christina to be putting their questions up in a forum. And I'll probably ask also that the rest of us might want to react to whatever in what we've done. I mean, it seems all of this, the technology is good, but everything takes longer somehow. And we lose time. That's typical. So I'd like a forum in which people respond in some way.
I know for me, it would be helpful if, not to like put everybody on the spot, but if I put my 4 through 6 and just kind of summarize what we talked about on the forum, I could put those up, you know, the notes that I took on what you said, if other people want to put the notes that they took on or the answers that they provided for their questions on the forum.
Would that be okay with Anthony and Keisha? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I've got mine up there pretty much already. I just have to finish out answering my 15.
Okay.
Okay, good. That's a good thing. And what do you think of the, you know, Lee and I had said, hey, we'll do some things online. You know, we had said that before. This was a decision made just this morning to do this online. So things weren't quite prepared in quite the same way they would have been if I had known this ahead of time. The other thing I'm going to put up is a PowerPoint and maybe also a video on the brain, because we're not having the guest lecture we had originally thought we were having. So that's, I hope to put that up as well.
I really like being in the classroom whenever we can.
Yeah, I agree.
That's just my personal preference.
Yeah. The forecast was icy.
Yeah, I appreciated staying tonight, so thank you.
Well, Lee goes all the way up to Binghamton.
You go all the way to Bloomsburg, so we were afraid.
Yeah, Williamsport, right? Yeah.
We didn't know what would happen tonight, and we didn't want people getting into accidents. So
Yeah, thank you.
I'm more afraid of ice than I am of even snow. I mean, I thought this was a good time to do this. Okay, now Anthony, you have a Zoom account.
I do, yes.
So we just used your Zoom account, which is fine.
Absolutely. Yeah, if that works for you. It's the same information every time, so you just have to use that link I sent previously, and I can always resend that whenever we meet.
I'm happy that we could put up the slides. I think I like that. And we really had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people. Lee didn't get much of a chance to speak. So we really had like 4 of us. With 8 of us, I think it would still be all right. I think we might have to be more careful.
Yeah. Anthony and I participated in one last week. It was like 6 or 7 people, and it was pretty organized. Yeah.
Okay,
I think the problem is the computers. Are they going to work? You know, because we lost people along the way. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think some of that was the haphazard nature of how we jumped into this. I use Zoom for my meditation group, and I use it for work quite a lot. And this is more problems than I've normally seen. And I've had as many as 25 people in the room. So I think especially if the host is managing muting and unmuting people, that kind of cleans up some of the audio issues. But yeah, no technology is perfect. Keisha just texted to say that her laptop battery died, so she apologizes that she automatically shut off, but she was sitting in the classroom with no power cord.
Okay, so I think we can say good night.
It's an experiment anyway.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for being willing to do it this way. It saved a scary trip home for me, for sure, so thank you.
Okay, all right, bye.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Yes.